used to feel normal. There is something in you that has become quietly intolerant of what used to feel comfortable. You left a conversation and could not fully explain why it drained you. You stood in a familiar place and felt like a visitor. That is not depression. That is not detachment. That is a calibration happening in you. You are being tuned to a new frequency so that what is coming can recognize you. The third sign is that you have had moments, brief and easily dismissed, where something about your future felt completely clear, not planned, not figured out by your own reasoning, just clear in a way that bypassed your understanding entirely, like fog lifting from a landscape you have been driving through for a long time. You could not hold that clarity for more than a few seconds before the familiar mind moved in to qualify it and reduce it back to mere wishing. But the moment of clarity was real, and it was not your imagination manufacturing what you desperately wanted to see. There is a fourth sign that many of you have been afraid to name. You have been letting things go, not all at once, not dramatically, but in quiet increments, things you used to grip tightly because they felt like they were keeping you stable. Relationships that have slowly altered in nature. Versions of the story you had been telling about yourself and your life that have lost their power to fully convince you anymore. There has been a slow loosening happening at a level beneath your conscious decision-making, and it has sometimes felt like loss before it revealed itself to be the necessary preparation for something your hands are about to hold. A fifth sign: you are here, right now, listening to this at this specific time in this specific month. And I want you to sit for a moment with what that means at a level deeper than the logistics of how you found this message. The chosen one does not stumble into their moments of revelation by accident. They are drawn to them by something older than preference or curiosity. Something that is already in motion on their behalf moves them toward the word they need before they have fully articulated the need. Type 777 inches, the comments, right now. If even one of those signs felt like something you have been living, let that number be your quiet agreement with what you are beginning to receive. What you are walking through right now is not a pause in your story. It is not God forgetting, not the universe recalculating, not a sign that the original promise was misheard or miscalibrated. It is an interior architecture phase. The shape of what is being built in you during this season is more complex than what you can see from the outside looking in.
And most chosen ones reach this threshold
and interpret the interior work as evidence that nothing is moving externally. But the two are not disconnected. The depth of the internal formation is always proportional to the scale of the external assignment that is waiting on the other side of it. The chosen one in formation is not someone who sits still while time passes. They are someone who keeps acting from their truest knowing, even when the environment around them has not yet confirmed that knowing is correct. They tithe toward the promise before the provision is visible. They speak identity declarations into empty rooms.
They make decisions aligned with who they are called to become, rather than who they currently appear to be. And the accumulated weight of those faithful, invisible actions is what shifts the architecture of the unseen in ways that eventually produce visible change. This is what you have been doing in this season, even when you could not see it clearly. And this is why what is coming is not arriving late. It is arriving precisely on time, in the exact configuration that requires everything you have been built through the waiting to be able to hold it. There is a question I want you to carry into the next part of what I am about to share, and it is this. What if the difficulty you have had fully receiving what God promised has less to do with your faith and more to do with something that happened to your mind long before you had language to describe it? Just hold that question. The answer is coming.
The need to be more prepared.
There is a woman whose story carries the exact pattern of the moment you are standing in right now. Her name is Mary. And before you move past this, because you think you already know what I'm going to say, let me come at this from an angle that most messages about her never reach. Mary was not asked to perform a miracle. She was asked to receive one. The announcement that came to her did not require that she had done everything right beforehand. It did not require that she had reached a certain level of spiritual maturity. It did not require that she had already figured out what the next step would look like, or that she had the capacity to understand the mechanism of what was being promised. The announcement came before she understood it. It came before she felt ready. It came before she had any reasonable framework for containing what was being placed in her life. And her first response was not a declaration. It was a question. How can this be? And here is what I need you to hear in that question. She was not asking in doubt. She was not pushing the announcement away. She was asking because a human mind, even a deeply faithful one, needs a bridge between what it has always known and what it is being asked to receive for the first time. She was being honest about the gap between what she knew how to hold and what was being handed to her. What was spoken to her in that space between the announcement and her response is the architecture of every chosen. One moment of receiving. Nothing is impossible with God. Not because of your worthiness, not because of your spiritual achievement, not because of how long you have been faithful, or how perfectly you have held the waiting, but because the one doing the giving does not require your capacity to understand the mechanism of the miracle. He only requires your willingness to open your hands. Chosen one, you are in a Mary moment, not because you have everything figured out, not because you have finally earned it, but because the announcement is coming. And the thing God needs you to receive before this month closes is already in motion. Your presence here in this moment, listening to these words, is your yes. That is all the yes that is needed right now. There is a practical thing I want to give you before we go deeper. Something you can begin using today. Because one of the greatest obstacles to receiving in a season like this is not a lack of faith or a weakness of character. It is a difficulty distinguishing between the voice of divine direction and the voice of fear, wearing the language of wisdom. They can sound similar. Both carry weight. Both present themselves as truth. Both speak with a kind of authority that feels reliable. But they are pulling you in completely opposite directions. And the way you tell them apart is not by analyzing which one is louder or more persistent. It is by examining where each one leads you. Here is the test. When a thought or direction arises, ask yourself one question. Does following this lead me further into myself or further into what I am being called to become? Fear, even when it speaks with perfect logic and presents compelling evidence, always leads inward. It circles, it reviews, it rehearses past failures as evidence for present caution. It is very good at building a case, but every case it builds has the same conclusion. Stay where you are, stay small. Stay in the territory you have already verified is safe. The voice of divine direction moves differently. It opens, even when what it is asking is frightening, even when it costs something you were not planning to give. There is a quality of expansion underneath it. It calls you towards something. It does not argue endlessly. It does not repeat itself hundreds of times trying to convince you. It speaks clearly once, sometimes twice, and then it waits. And the quality of that waiting feels different from the silence of unanswered prayers. It feels like an invitation that is still open. Begin practicing this distinction in the small decisions of your days. What voice am I hearing right now in this choice?
What direction does it actually lead me toward? And notice what happens when you choose to follow the one that opens rather than the one that circles. You do not have to do this perfectly. The practice is not perfection. The practice is simply the willingness to pay attention at a level most people never attempt. Let me pause here for just a moment, not because there is nothing more to say, but because what you have been taking in
that research for 8 weeks
carries weight. It lands in the body in a particular way. Take one real breath right now, slowly, not as a technique and not as a spiritual exercise. Just as a person who has been carrying something for a long time and who deserves one moment of simply breathing. There is nothing to perform in this breath, nothing to prove in it. Just the honest fact of being a human being who has been walking a road that has asked a great deal and who is still somehow here. Stay with me, because what comes next is what this month is really about. The season that is breaking open for those who have been faithful in the hidden place does not arrive all at once. It arrives the way light comes in the morning, first at the edges, barely visible, and common, then widening, until there is no more question about whether it is coming, then undeniable, impossible to argue with, filling every corner of the space it enters. There are things coming into alignment for you right now, through channels you did not arrange and cannot fully take credit for. Connections that have been in transit toward you for longer than you know. Resources that have been rerouted in your direction through circumstances that looked from the outside like detours or even setbacks. Answers that have been forming in the unseen while you were managing the weight of the scene. For some of you, this will arrive through an unexpected conversation, one that opens a door you had genuinely stopped believing still existed in your life. For others, it will arrive through a sudden and unexplained shift in a situation that has been so still for so long that you had begun to build your identity around its stillness. For others, it will come quietly in the discovery one morning that the thing you have been afraid of for years has somehow lost its power over you, not because you finally fought it successfully, but because something in you changed while you were sleeping. What is common to every one of these arrivals is this: they come to people who stayed, who did not abandon the vision, even when holding it made them look foolish to people who needed evidence before believing, who continued to act from the knowing, even when the knowing had nothing external to point to as proof, who kept their hands open, even on the days it felt like nothing was ever going to land in them. Gently press the like on this message if something you just heard landed in a real place. Let that be your agreement with what is being spoken over your life. Type "I receive" in the comments right now. Let those 2 words be your declaration before the rest of what needs to reach you can fully arrive. There is something about the nature of receiving that I have not told you yet, and it is the part of this message that carries the most weight for the chosen ones who have struggled the longest and waited the most faithfully. It is not a brand new revelation, but it arrives differently when it comes to someone who has been through what you have been through. And I want to make sure you hear it before we reach the closing of this message, because it changes something, not just about this month, but about every season that follows it. The obstacle I want to name is one that almost never gets named directly in messages like this, because it masquerades as something virtuous. It looks like discernment from the outside. It sounds like wise stewardship. It presents itself as the reasonable caution of someone who has been hurt before and learned from it. It is the pattern of needing to fully understand the mechanism of a blessing before you will allow yourself to receive it. You have done this. You have had a door open even slightly, and instead of walking through it, you stood in the doorway, examining the hinges. You have had an opportunity arrive and spent so long analyzing whether it was real,
whether it was safe, whether you were misreading something, that by the time you concluded it probably was what it appeared to be, the window had already moved on without you. You have heard a word, a sense, a quiet feeling that had the texture of God, and then you ran it through a verification process so thorough that by the end of the process, you had rationalized your way back into uncertainty. This is not a character flaw. This is a trained response. It was taught to you by a world that gave you enough false hope to make hope feel dangerous, by seasons that looked like beginnings and gradually revealed themselves to be something else, by people who made promises and then slowly or suddenly withdrew what they had offered. Your doubt is not stupidity. Your caution is not faithlessness. It is the scar tissue of a heart that learned to protect itself by arriving late to every invitation, so that if the invitation turned out to be a mistake, at least the fall would be shorter. But here is what scar tissue cannot tell you. It cannot tell you whether this particular door is the same as the last one. It reads every new situation through the template of the worst one it has experienced. It identifies threat in spaces where no threat exists, because the cost of being wrong about safety is one it has paid before and does not intend to pay again. And the chosen one who operates primarily from that kind of scar tissue will miss the very thing God has spent years preparing them to receive, not because they do not have faith, but because the faith they carry is being filtered through a protection mechanism that was never meant to be permanent. The work of this season is not to silence the doubt. It is to receive in spite of it, to open your hands even while a part of you is still reviewing the risk, to walk through the door before you have personally verified every detail about what waits on the other side. That is not recklessness. That is the precise kind of trust that God responds to. That is the kind of faith that moves something in the unseen.